Samoa is a divided South Pacific island group. It had 2 civil wars, but we're only going to really talk about the first one in this video. I also apologize now for any mispronunciations I make. So, it all began with economic interest in Samoa. This was formally established with a treaty of friendship and commerce between Samoa and the United States, and that was in 1878. It allowed entry into the port and to establish a naval as well as a coaling station. In exact words, promised the good offices of America in the event of differences between Samoa and any government at peace with the United States, or more simply put, protection of sorts. Similar treaties were signed between Samoa and Germany, as well as the UK. The one signed with Germany was known as the Favorite Nation Treaty. It was signed in 1879. The one with the UK was signed in the same year. Its provisions included Navy access and coaling at Saluafata, the US having the same privileges at Pango Pango. Britain got the same privileges in the Anglo-Samoan Treaty, but the exact location of where they would get the port was not clearly stated. The difference between the 3 groups is that the Germans and the Americans signed on the same political faction within Samoa. The UK did not. It was this same multinational interest that led to multiple conflicts later on to almost horrific proportions. Britain refused annexation in 1877, with Americans doing the same in 1878, as local politics were such a mess. Full incorporation was not desirable for all parties involved except the Germans. Even if there weren't foreign influences in the islands, civil war was likely to happen anyways, due to existing local tension. If it were not for the 1881 arrival of the USS Lackawanna, however, since it did arrive, there were 4 years of peace before a conflict actually did start. The conflict being the next leader, and there were 3 main contenders who ultimately led to a minor civil war that was quickly escalated by colonial powers. The first being Laiupepa, who is the most educated and possibly intelligent of the 3, followed by Mataafa, who is known for being fast-acting and attentive, or politically aware, and finally there was Tamasese, who was not even first considered a legitimate candidate. To better his chances, he broke ties with the existing political establishment and found himself in connection with Germany. In creating a new government, Germany saw this as an opportunity to initiate aggression, and they took over the northern part of a small peninsula on the Samoan Islands. The U.S. government responded by stating that the Good Offices Clause gave Samoan status as a U.S. protectorate, but both Britain and Germany denied this, leading to a Washington Conference in 1887. During this conference, 2 plans were proposed. The German plan was that there should be a singular advisor to the king, and whose interests should be decided based on who had the most financial interest and investment currently in Samoa. The Americans were like dismissive scoffing noise, and responded by saying that there should be a council to decide this. And this executive council would be able to decide the laws, consisting of the Samoan king, the vice king, as well as 3 foreigners representing their respective powers, but paid by locals to prevent excessive influence. Nothing was decided in the end aside from the realization that the UK would be more of an observer than anything else. Not even a month later, Germany started planning and acting to further take over the islands. To better protect its financial interest on the islands, the German Consulate worked with a German firm in a gradual process beginning by the forced trial and subsequent incarceration of Samoans that had been caught stealing off German plantations. Then, some ridiculous excuse not even worth mentioning to be horrendously exaggerated as an insult to Germany directly, in turn demanding impossible conditions of $12,000 in relation to everything stolen from the plantations and $1,000 alongside a public apology for this alleged insult. Unable to meet these demands, the king asked for an extension of the deadline he was given, and Samoa was then invaded by the Germans, who took over the government and began a brutal occupation. It was then that the other powers released a statement communicating that they supported Laiupepa for the throne, but he was immediately apprehended and exiled after turning himself in due to German threats of shelling civilians. It wasn't long the Samoan people started becoming incredibly enraged at their German occupiers, and this native unrest only grew further until, in the August of 1888, outright a rebellion broke out only to be stopped by a brutal military counterattack and even the shelling of part of a city. It only took until September when outright war presented itself, with Mataafa declaring himself king and went on the offensive against Tamasese. In hearing of this, American and British warships presented themselves promptly, and there was an awkward but undeniably tense standoff between the powers. Further theft from German plantations and British logistical support to Mataafa only further enraged the Germans. All tension broke between the powers, however, due to the 1889 Apia cyclone that decimated the warships present, with 6 of the 7 ships present before the storm being unworkable after. The ships that were completely wrecked include the USS Trenton, USS Vandalia, SMS Ever, SMS Adler, and the ships that were beached and later repaired would be the USS Nipsic, SMS Olga, and the lone survivor of all of this being the HMS Calliope. This cleared both the harbor and most of the tensions between the countries, although the Civil War continued to rage on. All the powers believed at the time Little Samoa really wasn't worth all this cost in terms of lives and ships sunk. It was the 14th of June, 1889, that the final act of the Berlin Conference of Samoan Affairs reached its completion with the Berlin General Act, which is the exact same thing, declaring Samoa an independent and neutral state, electing their own chief and establishing their local government based upon custom, while also establishing a Supreme Court to deal with future legal issues that could not be simply answered by the provisions of the Act. One of the most important aspects of this Supreme Court, and most particularly its Chief Justice, was their role in deciding future leaders when it wasn't certain. And additionally, they had the power of deciding what land foreigners can possibly rent and own, but only if a committee approved their ownership, and they had to have an outstanding claim made within 2 years of the court's creation. And a committee dealt with this, ultimately receiving 4,000 claims. Additionally, Apia was made a municipal district. Other significant provisions could be the banning of the sale of ammo, liquor, and firearms to the Samoans. Tamasese died, and this allowed Laupepa to return. He was backed by all of the powers in becoming king. At the same time, Mataafa contested this claim to the throne, and Germany refused to hear it at all, going so far as to order, primarily them, some influence from the other powers, the destruction of Mataafan villages. This was a genocide of livestock and buildings. Genocide is an exaggeration, but it's necessary to explain the extent everything was destroyed. Not fazed by this cruel destruction, Mataafa's followers presented him as king in 1893. His army was soon massacred thereafter. Laupepa planned to achieve absolute domination in a military sense over his longtime adversary, but the powers would not allow this, negotiated to surrender directly with Mataafa, leading to him being deported as part of the negotiation. The final phase of this drawn-out First Civil War was in 1894, with Tamasese's younger brother leading a revolution that was quickly shut down from British and German bombardment, the settlement being hastily reached on board one of the vessels. Peace reigned till the death of King Malitoa Laupepa on August 22, 1898, leading to the Second Civil War.